Kia ora te whānau. Welcome everyone. Could we please start with our karakia? Whakataka te hau ki te uru, whakataka te hau ki te tonga.
Ki te tonga,
Kia
kia
mā kina ki
kia
mā
taratara ki tai,
e hi ake ana te atakura, he tio, he huka, he hauhu, te hei
Māori ora.
And welcome to everyone, acknowledging our panel members, Mayor Burney, Councillor Jennings, and online. I see you there, Councillor Tamihana. Welcome from New Plymouth, I think. Good on you. And could I also acknowledge officers present, Justin and Sam, and Alice, of course, and members of the public, particularly our two who are here to speak in public. They'll be joined by another one at this stage, we think. Thank you for taking the time to come and speak. There were 16 submissions, I think, but thank you for making it a much richer experience by choosing to turn up and speak to your submissions. Could I just go now through the procedural stuff? Late items, I don't believe there are any. Declarations of interest, there are none.
Yes, sorry, Deputy Mayor, there is one for me, thank you. Submission number 15 from the Manawatu Estuary Trust, Catherine Lane, just declaring that I'm also a member of that group, but that will not relieve me from being impartial in my decisions today.
Thank you, Councillor Tamihana. Any further declarations of interest? Appear to be none. Confirmation of the minutes of 9th of October 2024, moved by Councillor Jennings moves, Mayor Burney seconds. In favour, please say aye. Against, say no. That's carried. And so to 5.1. So just looking at the process for today. So I'm back on page 3 for those of you with the order paper. So look, just the process today, running through it quickly in a moment. We'll just have an overview from officers, an introduction to the bylaw, an opportunity also for members of the panel to ask any questions of officers. We then move to hearing submitters, and we'll be hearing in the following order. We'll be hearing from Charles as our first submitter, then from Viv, and then from Martin O'Malley. Could I identify also that the Manawatu Estuary team did ask to be heard, submitting to that in the name of Catherine Lane. However, they are not able to be present today. Officers have talked with Catherine, her main concern was about the inclusion of wider environmental considerations in the bylaw. They are comfortable with the officer's recommendation, which will come to us, which talks about including the words the associated environment in the recommendation, which captures the concerns of the Manawatu Estuary team, I believe. But could I just double check that anything I'm missing in that, Dan? That is correct. So on that basis, the Manawatu Estuary team is quite happy not to appear today. And the third person is Martin O'Malley, who we hope to see later. So in terms of the process then, we will, having heard from officers, we'll then hear from submitters, a chance also to question submitters, to test their evidence. There will be the opportunity following having heard from submitters to hear from officers who will respond to the submissions today. Questions again can come from members of the panel of officers, and then we go into deliberations, finish with recommendations to the full council meeting, acknowledging that full council has the final decision in the process. So with that background, I'm going to invite officers to speak to the report, but first of all I just want to hear a general question from Councillor Jennings, which will help in setting the scene. Councillor Jennings.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. The question to the team, just as part of the overview, is that we've had a couple of submissions, including the one from Mr. O'Malley, that obviously come from food businesses or people involved in food and hospitality. And I was wondering if you could just sort of outline at a very high level how these businesses are already regulated and how this will sort of how this might interact with that existing regulatory framework, just to sort of set the scene for how do these businesses, what are these businesses already required to do, and so that we can sort of understand what the changes look like in practice, if that's possible, weaving that into your overview.
Certainly can. On that note, I just also want to acknowledge that we, in parallel with this process, have been running the consultation on local waters done well, and there is some crossover from submitters in terms of feedback into that process as well. So just acknowledging that some of those questions that have been raised that aren't directly related to the bylaw would likely be captured in that wider local waters done well decision-making process. So getting back to the bylaw, the key purpose is to facilitate an integrated approach to all local waters, so that's water supply, wastewater, trade waste and stormwater. This approach recognises those interdependencies, and that's not just interdependencies between the water, but also the fact that there is other regulations out there, and ensuring that our bylaw interacts and aligns with those, the Food Safety Act and the other regimes across our district. The proposed bylaw was endorsed by Council for community consultation on the 11th of December 2024. We went out to submission on the 13th of January through to the 14th of March this year. The extended timeframe was required because of the inclusion of trade waste, so that was a key requirement for the time extension. 16 submissions were received, 6 supported the bylaw, 9 did not support the bylaw, and 1 did not state whether they supported or not. 3 submitters, as we've discussed, will speak today. We have responded to some questions raised before the hearing, but specifically in response to your question, really wanting to highlight what that process will look like. So this is, I suppose at the heart of it is actually Council having an understanding of risk to our network and our environment. So having access to information, being able to connect with these businesses and then actually work alongside them to understand how we best protect the environment ultimately. In terms of the requirement to register, that's a one-off. That's required only when there's a change of business or a change of ownership. We believe having developed that form, it's an online form, we think it would take less than 5 minutes for that business to register. So we're not creating lots of undue process for all those small businesses. It's really a matter of getting that application form, understanding if there's a risk, and for us to then work alongside certain businesses if required in order to achieve our objectives around protecting the environment or what's going into our wastewater network. The majority of food businesses will require consent if they're connected to the wastewater network, so I think we've been up front around that. The submission that was referenced, there was concerns around the frequency of those assessments, and one of the submissions referred to the setting of fees and charges, and that is an annual process that requires officers to justify why a particular fee was being set. It also highlights the benefit of the registration and responsibility put onto Council to determine the risk posed on that yearly assessment. So effectively with a low business, we're assuming that they're low risk, but effectively rather than making that assumption that they're a high risk business. Council officers will work internally to confirm operational process and are working to reduce the operational burden on businesses. So we fully acknowledge a number of submitters' concerns that we're putting another cost and another process onto these businesses. The focus of the regulatory activities will be on high risk and non-compliant businesses rather than on low risk. So certainly where we put our time and effort will be where, based on that initial application process and that first assessment, that officer time will be directed towards the highest risk to ultimately to our environment and our network. So it will certainly work from highest risk down, not the other way around. There was also a question around the time frame for the trade waste consent. That was carried over from our previous bylaw. However, in order to address that under section E4.15, officers have proposed to change the wording to the period for a trade waste consent to be granted will be 2 to 5 years from the date of the grant, so allowing some flexibility in the way that it's set out. We'll also remove E4.16, which would allow that flexibility for operationally compliant businesses who undertake low risk activities effectively.
Thank you. And before I ask for questions, sorry, I've got myself a bit out of order. We do need to receive the report. So could I take you please to page 8, and I'm suggesting if someone's happy to move on block A, B and C. So A reads that report 25/92 proposed local water combined bylaw, hearing of submissions be received. B, that the matter is or decision is recognised as significant in terms of section 76 of the Local Government Act, and C, that the committee considers the feedback from submitters and officers on the proposed local waters combined bylaw. Someone happy to move? Thank you, Councillor Jennings. Mayor Burney seconds. In favour, please say aye. Against, say no. It's carried. We're now back in order again. So, any questions from the panel of Dan or Justine? There appear to be none at this stage.
Kia ora, Deputy Mayor Allen. Just one from me.
Yep.
Really just wanted to follow up on the advice we received from Mr. Haig around the feedback around Te Manawa Wai, and just want to make sure that that's a consideration for the meeting, if it's going to be adopted or not, the use of that. Yeah, that was all. Just wanted to note that now.
Daniel?
There was anything specific in addition to what we've covered in the response, Councillor Tamiana? Were you comfortable with that? The response that's been covered?
Yeah, I absolutely was.
Sorry.
Yeah, sorry, Daniel. Yeah, absolutely was comfortable. I just wanted to make sure it was noted here, and I wanted to actually just support and endorse that it's still retained if there's a level of comfort from the rest of the team. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Justin.
Further questions? There appear to be none. Thank you, Dan, for that overview. Could we now call Charles? Come join us, Charles. And welcome to Martin. Is Martin O'Malley? Yeah, welcome, Martin. We've got you down as the third speaker.
Great.
And just to identify, there is new material from Charles, but his original submission is from pages 39 on in the audit paper.
Yes. Good morning, councillors, governance and operations, and the mayor. This is an addendum to my original submission. Greetings and salutations to all. Hopefully it is the assumption that my submission has been read rather than this addendum. The problem is this HDA statement of proposal is do what we say, don't do what we do. Okay? It's hypocrisy and it's bureaucratic. And the reason I say this, whom prosecutes the Hoffner District Council for breaching the same bylaws? Because the bylaws are actually aimed at the people of the community. That's where it's aimed at. Now, when we talk about, I've given you, showing you pictures, when we're talking about gutters, right? And who's responsible for the gutters like that? I know that's State Highway 1, but you've got gutters and you've got stormwater that goes into the stormwater systems, right? Because what goes in must come out. It's got to come out somewhere from all these stormwater systems, because these bylaws are basically based on stormwater systems, right? So in these stormwater systems, you've got, other than the rubbish, which you see in that other paper of these things that's trying to catch everything, can catch all the leaves and branches and rubbish and everything. It cannot catch heavy metals and carcinogenics. And that's a big problem, because you've got street gutters, you've got car washes, people are washing their cars down on the streets, whether it's at the fire brigade thing. Sometimes there was one here, car wash up at the BP petrol station, and it goes all into the stormwater system. It's ongoing pollution and contamination into Lake Hoifura for 75 plus years. It's going into the Hakeo stream, the Wairori stream from the living wastewater treatment plants. All this thing. Everyone knows the problems, but the powers responsible and in control of doing that have done nothing proactive about it. Now, I read in your document here, you've got two statements I'm looking at. Partnership with Tangata Whenua. The Maoris you're talking about in this district wouldn't have a clue about anything. And then they got a clue about is how to get backhanders from you people. How have they cleaned up that lake? You tell me. They haven't. Our kaka here is getting killed, is dying because of the salt and sediments from the market gardens, right? That's not your responsibility. That's Horizons, people like that, right? And you got outstanding environment. We haven't got an outstanding environment. From the mountain to the sea, I go from the mountain to the sea as a fisherman, hunter, gatherer, right? If that lake was beautiful, wow, the tourism we could have. But it isn't. And tourists do try to go down and have a look around. They do. And they go, oh, I thought New Zealand was clean and green. So this is part of my submission, in part. So I'm asking the question, where to from here? Because if you want to talk to Maoris, I've been here all the time, I might be a thorn in your side. Anyone can talk to me about anything. I would challenge all these Maoris in the Hoifuna, especially the Mopoko tribe. I will challenge them, what they know that I know. I think Justin Tamihana would probably know that I'm an environmentalist. I'm not a tree hugger, you know. I'm not one of those. Kia ora tātou. Any questions?
Any questions for Charles? Councillor Jennings.
Thank you, Chair. Charles, thank you for your two, submission and then the supplement. My question is, I kind of worked through what you had to say to us, and I think there's sort of two categories for me, which is where you're talking about how Horowhenua District Council undertakes its business in terms of how it interacts with those different systems and compliance, and then second was around enforcement of the bylaw. But I wanted to put those things to one side because we've got to be really clear today in terms of the hearing about being focused on the content and the text of the bylaw. And so my question to you is, if you were king for a day, what would you change in the bylaw? What is it that specifically in the text of the bylaw that you don't like or that you would add to? So King Charles gets to rewrite any part of the bylaw. Which bit is it?
Well, when I read these documents that come in, and questions and statements are said in there, I reply to those questions and statements. That's what my submission was all about. Was replying to those. You know, you're setting up these bylaws, what you want and what people can't do. Otherwise, it's going to get prosecuted by the bylaws. And that's why I'm putting it back at council. How can you prosecute people for breaking the rules of a bylaw and the council are doing exactly the same of what they're doing the same. Whether it's contractors, whether it's your operation people coming up with ideas, you're doing the same as what you expect. The council expects the community to adhere to the bylaws.
So look, I'll just thank you for the question and I'll just get Dan to comment on that specific issue.
Yeah.
Thank you, Charles. I think that's a really relevant point that you've raised there, that the bylaws are a set of rules, and you've then alongside that raised concerns around effectively what's coming out the bottom end of a system, and what we're acknowledging that those solutions that we put in along the way or at the bottom aren't always the right fix, and you term it, the ambulance at the bottom of the cliff. The bylaw is actually the set of rules that prevents or manages what firstly gets into the system. So by virtue of us having some rules around how things come into the system in the first place, that ultimately reflects the quality and the environmental outcome at the bottom end. So, the whole process we've been working through over the last 5 years with the lake stormwater consent, for example, in Levin, is getting a whole lot of data to understand where we've got the heavy metals or where we've got the nitrogens. Where's that nitrogen getting in? Is it from the residential properties, or is it from the adjoining farmland? So we've got a whole lot of data that we're starting to collect up on that, and so we've got a much better understanding. The point that you've raised around the downstream defenders and the image, we're actually getting testing done upstream and downstream so we can understand how much of those heavy metals actually drop out with the sediment that we're collecting. So we are in a process of gathering data, but back to the point of the bylaw is it's really difficult to just simply invest in building new pieces of equipment and filters to take contaminants out if we're just allowing people to do whatever they like in the upstream and cross-contaminate stormwater with runoff that shouldn't actually be in there. So that is a very important part of the bylaw, that we actually need that tool to manage what gets into the system.
Daniel, I understand totally. A good example is the Partiki stream. You've got 2 landfills leaching into that Partiki stream, right? And another way of looking at it is say we got laws about speeding on the road, so you can do X amount of k's per hour or whatever, and yet I'm doing say 50 here, and a policeman's chasing someone else. He's doing 180. Well, there's rule for one set of people, but not for the other set, and that's how I see it. How can you criticise the community with bylaws and you're doing the same? People are looking and say, you're being a hypocrite. You're supposed to set the standards, not set the standards on people that you're going to be a hypocrite to. And that's what my submission is all about.
And quick response. I'm aware of time, but quick response from Dan on that.
Yeah, just for the record, I'll connect up with you offline, Charles. I'm not aware of any landfills along that Partiki stream that are leaching, but I'll come and pick that up with you offline. And just I suppose want to reiterate that we're currently engaged with Lake Korowhanaua Trust around the Levin stormwater consent. There will be further engagement processes. There's not a decision made whether there'll be a hui te iwi or what the next steps will look like. But ultimately, there will be a public process around that as well. So there'll certainly be an opportunity for your concerns around the lake to be heard as we move forward.
Just to finish off there, Dan, I keep on telling you people, look at your historical records and you'll see things clearly.
Thanks. And before you go, sorry, I'm aware of time, but Councillor Tamihana does have his hand up. Councillor Tamihana, question?
Kia ora. Thank you very much. Thank you, Matua Charles, for your submission and your passion. And yes, you are right. You do ring me quite often, and we discuss the importance of our entire. Look, I think you touched upon some really good points there for me, and through you, Mr. Chair, to Daniel. I do wonder about the compliance stuff and how much. I think in the past, what we do know is that things haven't gone as well as we liked, and we totally acknowledge that as I do as council. And there are ways we want to work forward, particularly protecting our environment, Lake Punahou and those other tributaries that you raised. But I suppose my question, Daniel, was he's raising the matter of compliance and the fact that HDC have in the past maybe not been compliant with some of our activities. And then sometimes that compliance is not ours entirely. So I suppose what I was probably asking is, in this bylaw, do we believe that responsibility will sit with the right parties, meaning Horizons and their responsibilities with the areas they're responsible for? I suppose that's one question. And I was just finally just going to say, around the Lake Trust domain, yes, that has been reinvigorated, and I certainly look forward to seeing what work they undertake for the restoration mitigation required at Lake Horowhenua and some of the treatments that we'd like to see happen before water enters back into the natural environment. So thank you very much for the opportunity.
I can say this absolutely will provide council the tools to manage what's coming into the network, and it will shine a spotlight on HDC's responsibilities effectively once it's in the system. We own it, so then we need to manage, to ensure it's compliant out the bottom end. But through this process, it will make it clear on what responsibility lies with HDC versus the regional council. And the consent process will certainly highlight that as well.
No, thank you, Charles. You always show up. Appreciate it. Good on. Could we welcome now Viv? Come on, Viv, join us. Her submission is on pages 47 to 50. You found your glasses.
Morning all. Yeah, I found this document of yours, the proposed. Wait a minute, let me just organise myself a little bit more. Oh, there we go. Here's it. It was a very good document, Daniel. If you were instigating this very good document. Okay. It covers most of the things and everything that we really should do. Although I must admit, Sam's made a comment and I suddenly thought, oh, this is more about trade waste than it is about stormwater. But anyway, we'll go on with what I have prepared. With urgency, we have to tackle this problem of our local waters. Preventing future pollution is critical now. This increased stormwater, groundwater that we are going to see from increased buildings, properties, more properties built on sections, like there was one, now there's 4. The pipes have never been increased. They're more concreting because people don't want to mow their lawns. The increased roofs and stuff like that. The contamination from concrete and stuff like that. And I don't think it's going to be addressed by these downstream defenders. And we need better defence. Dissolved nitrates, phosphorus, ammonia, cyanobacteria, E. coli, plus many other already dissolved in the drains running into the lake. As we know, Horizons only have a lava test on Lake Horowhenua, A, B, C or D, D being rotten, which D has been for the last 25 years that I know of. My nieces used to do the regattas on there and always told go home and have a shower afterwards. So the lake has never had any real testing done on it, telling us where the pollutions come from, Daniel. And I'm afraid that there's another little area there that no one in council seems to focus on, and that's the Barry Curtis Place Orville drain. Pipes, you can see the pipes sticking out of houses into the drain, concreted into the drain. Fieldfield Place is another place like this. And all of this ends up in the ocean, the ultimate receiver of our polluted water, showing more and more global temperature rises. Not only that, but the streams and rivers filled by sediment, chemical oxygen demanding, cutting off the oxygen that's filling up the streams. We see in the sediments that Hokio stream, the channel has been filled up with sediment. So where's going to be the next flood for this year? Out into the roadway. HDC have put in a HS1 board bore on Hokau Beach Road to test the lake at the land before it gets to the landfill, so that the plume that's coming out of the landfill won't flow into it. But the trouble is, we have a problem out at the landfill, as we have in all of Horowhenua, is the increased stormwater. Now, farmers, just as Charles related to, farmers have to follow the rules, and so, as far as we're concerned, HDC do too. If HDC don't follow the rules, HDC should get the penalties. Wellington Regional Council took a slap on the hand for letting breaches out of their waterway down there, and I feel HDC should get the breaches too, not just the one out at the pot at the moment, which is a warning for having at least 20 times the amount of nitrates going out there. We won't go into that because that's your business, right? Farmers must follow the new rules for ponds and dams, and so does HDC. The leachate pond there does need emptying, although David McMillan assures me if he has to take the tanker out there, he will. I'm pleased about that, because the 8 Horizons till Hokau don't drink the water 3 days after the rain stopped, because you will be full with contaminants out there. The new system at the landfill, it seems to be only contesting changing the ammonia nitrate levels and not the other heavy metals that are dissolved. And of course it gets pumped back through the testing station and then out to the pot. Hokau Beach is suffering. It's sick out there. The protection for kai gathering is sick, proving to most of us that these cheap ways aren't working for growth. Government says talk to the people, the community, but HDC only seems to have a citizens panel who really don't know what's happening in the community, and their comments a bit shows them. Just leave it.
Viv, I'm aware that the 5 minutes is up, so could you just round it off, and then we'll hopefully have time for some questions. So look, just from me to begin with, you've identified a lot of concerns around the environment. You haven't talked really about specifically what the bylaw is trying to do, this integration of the 4 waters, how by understanding their interdependency we can actually do things better. Could I just get an overview from you about your views on this proposed bylaw as a piece of work which may help actually to address those issues you've raised?
Sorry, I made a bit there. Well, to me, the bylaw has to contain things like no polluted groundwater, stormwater will find its way into a stream, river, or ocean. Actually, that is the saying Horizons say. That is their number one saying, and they set it up at Tara-Ika as well. So HDC needs to prevent overflow going into the lake to start with, encouraging building developers and apartments to concrete in less areas, dissolved pollution runoffs. Yes, and actually there was an interesting thing on the news the other day where national government says that builders have to pay their own infrastructure contributions. Why are we still looking at as a top priority in one of your documents that vested assets, the ratepayers still pay for them?
So on balance, what would be your answer to my question, Viv?
I really, at this stage, don't know, but to tell you the honest truth, there is one question I'd like to ask you, please. Where does the trade waste go now?
Get Dan to answer that.
The trade waste goes into our wastewater network, and
Where?
well, at the source, and this is the purpose of the bylaw, is to ensure that we don't have surface water runoff that has contaminants that should be going
So
into.
in a polite way, you're saying out that will be
Could we please let Dan speak?
It goes into the wastewater treatment plant. So that is the purpose of the bylaw. I've heard a lot of concerns around stormwater pollution. this is one of those tools that we can utilise to ensure that all trade waste is captured and treated appropriately. So that's not just the common perception around what trade waste is with material that should be going down a sewer plant. It's also ensuring that any high risk business that could have generate heavy metals, that we actually source, track it. We work with those businesses to ensure they've got adequate stormwater plans for their yards to manage and capture and treat it appropriately. So the bylaw is effectively the rule book that we can ensure trade waste ends up where it should and not in the wider environment.
Thank you. Are there any other questions for Viv? Appear to be none.
Sorry, not so much. Thank you. Not so much a question for Viv, but I just wanted to thank you for submission and continually raising those points and championing our environment. Definitely heard your kōrero, Viv, around the impact of the environment, and much of it, as you described, is pretty true about how it acts out on the whenua. But what I have some comfortability in with the bylaw is I'm all about tracking waste. I have been since I came here. And so I hope that there is some assurance to you and other submitters that one of these things that this process will undertake is it is going to help us to track our waste. It is going to help us to identify where those main contributors are coming from and how they're entering into our waste network. And so I do have a level of confidence here that this is absolutely the right thing we need to do to have the right data, to have some science to back it up, and then we as a district can start leaning into where we need to prioritise the change that you and Matua Charles have both outlined to do better by our environment, but also harmonising it with development and growth. And as you say, it's a staged approach. It has to be done carefully, strategically, and again, just wanted to thank you for your submission and just leave those comments. Kia ora.
Yeah, look, and thank you for that, Councillor Tamihanum. Just in terms of process, it's important that we probably keep our opinions, our commentary and so on to when we go into deliberations. But thank you for acknowledging for Viv's contribution. I just want to flick over to Dan for a moment just to respond to an earlier point.
Yeah, just a point you raised earlier, Viv, and I do thank you for the submission, but that was in relation to the pot and 20 times the nitrates going through into the Waiwiri stream. I just want to reiterate the fact that overall the site is compliant. Council has spent a significant amount of money over the last 3 years to effectively rebuild 1987 infrastructure with all new infrastructure. The site overall is functioning well and as planned, and we went into quite a lot of detail with the ERP, which is membership from Mopoko, Raukawa Hapu and Horizons in the last couple of months, and it's a 6-monthly hui to look at the operations and compliance of the site. Those details should be available online so that there's an understanding, the minutes from that, but I'll get a copy sent to you as well so that you've got a lot more comfort that we don't have an issue with 20 times the nitrogen and that overall the site is in a good standard of operation. We'll get that report sent out to you. I can certainly do that.
Mayor Burney?
Sorry, this probably doesn't have much to do with the water bylaw, but in your submission you make the comment that water meter scheme is costing ratepayers seems to be going to be sold off to Australia. What evidence have you got that we're thinking about sell? Turn on your mic.
There was a comment in the other one, something about it had something about the meter ownership would go somewhere else. That was why. That's where I got that detail from.
You're probably referring to the transfer of assets to a new water entity that's going to deliver water services, but it certainly won't be sold off privately, or any suggestion that it be sold to a different country.
Yeah, I know.
So, I just,
Okay, it's just a matter of keeping the public record straight, Mayor Burney. Thank you for that.
I do like to thank Daniel for telling me about the trade waste going to the treatment station. Thank you.
Good on you, Viv. Thanks again for your submission. Okay, Martin, could we welcome Martin O'Malley? Thank you for taking the time to submit to us, Martin. It always makes a difference when people come along and talk in person.
It's me? Okay. So, morning, everybody. I made a submission very quickly. The piece of paper was dropped off at the pub down the road, which I'm no longer involved in. But so I quickly made a submission, and so I was able to come and talk today. But I see you've included restaurants, etc., and pubs and cafes in your trade waste category. So anyone involved in those, and if someone owns a cafe or a pub or whatever, so they live somewhere and they pay their share of water rates and charges, etc., which are around the $1,500 mark. So then they come and they lease the building, and part of the arrangements are always plus rates and insurance. So now they've contributed twice. Now you want them to contribute a third time through trade waste charges, where in effect they've all got or should have the fat, the what do you call it, the septic. So that if you've got your grain, you have to go through the fat collector basically, and then so that keeps all the fat out of the system. The council then that then goes to the council wastewater structure, which then goes down into the onto land, and any overflow in between obviously is not the fault of any cafes or restaurants and etc. And most of their waste is similar to household waste, so there's nothing carcinogenic basically. So you're putting a fair bit of onus on the cost for these organisations, and we're in less than 5 years. The highway we're going past here, and the pressure on cafes by that stage will be fairly high. I don't know how many will survive after the main road leaves here. The other thing I wanted to talk about was this the new government directive that's coming in, that you have to provide that councils now have to have an organisation or entity to implement their water services and wastewater. That's correct, isn't it? So they're basically taking it's a big asset grab and tax game for the government. So you will be required to transfer your current infrastructure over to the new entity. That's correct, isn't it? And so that's owned by the ratepayers at the moment. That's correct. And then so you will have to sell or transfer those assets over at the cost of that infrastructure, so that the new entity will be required to pay GST, obviously, and then it'll have to required to pay tax on its profits. So if we rate payers and the owners of the infrastructure give that asset infrastructure away, then that they can no longer receive any benefit from what the money they've already spent. So when this process happened, which is very soon, the council needs to be able to get the money back off even though it's a council-controlled operation, they need to be able to get money back off the operation either through leasing or through some sort of sale, so that then the CTO would pay the council on an annual basis for either what they bought off them or what their lease for that infrastructure, so that reduces their amount of income tax that they would have to pay to the government, or company tax. That's correct, isn't it? So the CCO that you set up, the entity will have to pay GST and it will have to pay income tax from the money it makes. That's correct, isn't it?
So, so look, I'll get Dan to reply to that, but I guess then my focus will be on saying to you, Martin, what is your view, given if this information is correct, what is it you're wanting to feed back to us?
So that there's no way.
So just in terms of process, I'll get Dan to address those questions, and then we'll hear back from you. Dan.
Yeah, I'm certainly hearing your concerns, Mr. O'Malley, particularly around that additional burden that it's going to face on small business. But I think you made a couple of key points that all businesses should have required grease traps. They should be doing the right things, but ultimately the cost, if they aren't, is borne by the ratepayer or ultimately the environment. So it's important that through this process we've got a really simple 5-minute max online application form, and we won't be out there necessarily causing problem and undue costs for lots of those businesses that are doing what they should be doing. But if there's others that are perhaps higher risk, that don't have normal wastewater similar to a house, you'd be quite surprised by some of the things that are used within businesses, and sometimes it can even be around the way that the grease traps are managed. So there's a whole lot of education, a whole lot of work we can actually do with businesses, but we won't be out there necessarily causing a problem for businesses actually doing what they should be doing. It's picking up those ones that are causing a burden on the wider ratepayer or the environment effectively. So just moving on to your last question around the local waters done well, we have been in a parallel consultation process. I'm unsure whether I haven't checked whether you've submitted on that as well, but there is certainly a significant amount of work around the council table that needs to be done before any decisions are made. But the key message that I probably need to communicate is that it's not necessarily around selling off of assets. The community would still own those assets. It's really focused on how water supply is managed. So it's more so on the management of those assets than the ownership. So we're not expecting that setting up a water supply organisation would then have a large tax burden that would have to be borne by the ratepayer. Happy to cover that off in more detail at a later date around the water services.
Okay, so once the entity is set up, then what happens to the rates that the water charges that are on rates now? Council would no longer get those, would they?
Correct. But I think
Correct. But we are conflating two issues. The whole local waters done well is a separate issue, which I'm sure Dan's happy to.
And also that has to be expedited. They're speeding that through. You have to get that all organised by the beginning of September. So government is basically taking ownership of the water and giving it to council, directing it to council.
Yeah.
And then council will then set up an entity which will be a council-controlled entity, or it can have investors, etc., involved in it. And that will then set up that entity, as was rightly said earlier, to be sold to Australia. So these will be like a utility, exactly like as government expressed in one of its advice to councils, that set up a utility similar to power.
Martin, look, that is a whole separate issue from today, but I don't want to disrespect your interest and involvement. I'm happy for us or relevant officers to meet offline to talk that through with you. But around the bylaw specifically and your concerns about, what good practices do in terms of managing on-site their issues, are you happy with the reply that therefore it's about just making sure it's certificating it rather than a full consenting process? Does that answer satisfy?
That does, but I am concerned about the charges that these extra charges, which will be a couple $100 a year at least to the hospitality trade. these all add up to significant amounts, because of the cost to these this part of the infrastructure that these this hospitality sector, the cost already to council through compliance is quite high.
Hey, no, thank you. Is there any? Is that all okay?
I understand why there's only three of us giving submissions today. Maybe is that a reflection on what happens going forward from these meetings? Is these oral submissions of any real use? But that's an aside.
Oh, 100% they are. 100% they are. Yeah. No, so look, thank you. And again, if you want to talk more about local waters done well and just what that means for us, honest answer is we just don't know ourselves at this stage. We've got some irons in the fire, but that's a whole process which is separate from the bylaw.
Right.
So, hey, Martin, thanks so much for
Thank you.
Really appreciate it.
Have a nice day.
Good on you. Cheers. Sorry, I did jump the gun. Is there anyone who would like to ask Martin any questions? All good. Councillor Tamihana, you're okay? Yeah, thanks. Thank you for that. Thanks, Martin. Cheers. So, look, we've done a process really where, as we've heard from submitters, officers have been replying bit by bit as we've gone through the process, but opportunity now for officers just to do the overview, having heard not only heard the submitters today, the three submitters today, but also those who did not wish to speak. Any final comments that you'd like to make? Over to you, Dan and Justin.
I think I really covered that off in the introduction earlier, and would welcome any questions.
So, any further questions from the panel for officers? Councillor Jennings.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, Daniel, just a couple of kind of probably wrapping up questions for me. And I've been particularly interested on the trade waste aspects of bylaw based on the submissions that have been received from obviously Marty just now, and there are a couple of others in the submission pack. And so if you can break this down for me, my understanding is that food and hospitality type businesses, as a matter of law set by central government, fall within the definition of trade waste. So is that correct? Is that?
Yes.
And so what the bylaw is looking to do is set out a process to manage any trade waste generated by those businesses. And there's two steps that are essentially introduced or required through the bylaw, which formalise existing practice around some of those businesses. And so the first is a registration component, which from the assurances that you've provided earlier is not intended to be an onerous exercise. It's a one-off, very quick, basic information about the business. This is the nature of the waste that we generate. Step one. Step two is a trade waste consent, which would then be about permitting in certain circumstances, or depending on how the business is classified, what kind of waste can be disseminated into the council wastewater network. Have I got everything correct so far?
Yes, you have.
And so my takeaway from the submissions appears to be that the concern is about sort of twofold from hospitality businesses, which is compliance costs and compliance time. And so based on what you've said so far, the time in terms of dealing with the registration process is minimal. But could you just outline to me, what does a trade waste consent process look like for a food and hospitality business?
I'll just get Justine to come up and speak to that. Certainly from experience with dealing with some of the larger businesses in town,
that hasn't been an overly arduous process either. But we've been doing a lot of research and trying to, redefine and simplify the more low risk, food premises you've discussed. So I'll let Justine speak on that one in a bit more detail. Thank you.
So just to confirm, the question is, what is the consent process?
Yes, if you can just sort of paint us a bit of a picture around what it would look like for, say, Marty or another business. If the bylaw proceeds as it is, what does it look like in practice?
So when a business will register with us, council will then look at the information that's come in and will categorise people and give them the right consent form to fill in. How it works at the moment is that a business needs to kind of categorise themselves, so there's a chance that you might fill the wrong form in. This puts the onus onto council officers to decide which form you need to do. What we're working to at the moment is that businesses that have a very specific mechanism that we're going to be looking at, so for example, a hospitality business where we're primarily looking at a grease trap, we have a simplified form that we'll be looking at getting them to fill in. This is compared to a very large, complex manufacturing business, for example, where we will need a lot more information, and there may be some very individual specific treatments that are being done for that site. So people will get directed to the correct form to fill in, and we will make sure that it is as streamlined as possible to give us the information that we exactly need without them having to fill in, say for a small cafe, a stormwater drainage protection plan that we would expect to go with large-scale manufacturing sites.
It's also not always about adding cost to business. Through this collaborative work that we will do to gather information, council can start to advise on where businesses could put their own pre-treatment in to actually improve the quality of their runoff, and that would actually reduce their trade waste charges. So, it is about gathering information and ensuring we understand what's going through the system.
Happy, Councillor Jennings. Thank you, Councillor Jennings. Councillor Tamihana.
Thank you very much. Look, just wanted to follow up, Justine, if I can, because when you gave the example, you talked about a grease trap, and so I get that for a smaller hospitality business and that, but I actually wondered, are you able to give us an example of a large company that has the same type of product? I suppose I'm thinking about a large meatworks or something like that, where a grease trap's not appropriate, but perhaps they're still the final product is, if that makes any sense. I think that's for the listeners, because I want to know how we treat a hospitality small business as opposed to a much larger commercial operator that might be creating the same type of byproduct.
For the larger premise, it's a matter of actually having a management regime in place. So we'd need to see their proposal around sampling of the wastewater, almost a response plan if they have an event within their site that could discharge contaminants over and above what we would be expecting in the wastewater. But a lot of that currently is geared to a targeted large base of industrial premises that actually generate waste. We measure what it is, and it's a charging mechanism. So certainly for the larger ones, they need to do a lot more work, and there's an expectation that there's a cost given that that trade waste is required to be then treated, and it's the business that pays for that, not being a burden on the wider ratepayer.
Thank you very much for that explanation.
Mayor Burney.
Sorry, Justine, and I might have not identified it within the bylaw, the timing of those consents, because there's some thinking that this is going to be an onerous ongoing exercise for people, and I just wanted to clarify for them that it is, once it's done, how long does it last?
So So this was the suggestion that we'd provided at the start, that at the way it stands at the moment, you'd be allocated a consent for 2-year period, but you would be able to extend that to 5 years if you met certain conditions. This was the suggestion that we had presented, that if we change it to saying that a consent could be held from 2 to 5 years, that allows us some operational flexibility for low risk, very compliant businesses, that we can extend that time frame to 5 years.
Thank you. Any further questions? There appear to be none. So thank you, Justine and Dan, for your input and your answers today. Could I take councillors now to pages 8 and 9 of the order paper, which has the recommendations. I'm looking at recommendation D, and I'm asking if anyone's prepared to move D1. I'll just read it out for the public. So D1 reads, to protect and prevent damage to local waters and the associated environment, which is the additional phrase, to manage, protect and prevent damage or misuse to local water services and the associated land, structures, infrastructure and associated environment. Is someone prepared to move that?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm happy to move it. You didn't want me to move all of the amendments, or would you like to take them one by one? Sure. Yeah, I'm happy to move that first.
Thank you, Councillor Jennings. Seconded by Mayor Burney. Any discussion on that?
Or briefly, just I think that this was obviously very sensible. There was a very useful submission from the Manawatu Estuary Trust that raised this issue, and I think that the officer response to that submission is pretty self-explanatory. So
thank you. Any further discussion? Appears to be none. I'm going to put that. Those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against, say no. It is carried. Recommendation D2, addition of the following explanatory note after E4.4. For clarity, any business that produces trade waste but whose waste does not enter the council-controlled wastewater or stormwater networks, either via pipes, tankered waste operator or other method, will not be required to hold a trade waste consent but will still be required to register. And that's had some discussion today. Anyone happy to move that?
I'm certainly happy to move it.
Absolutely, this is a battle for hands here. I'll go Mayor Burney and seconded by Councillor Jennings. Discussion?
Again, I'll just speak briefly to this. I think that this makes a lot of sense. I can't recall if there was 1 or 2 submissions that covered this or might have talked about this. But this obviously makes a lot of sense. And so the registration step is what gives us the ability to understand the picture of the business and then make that assessment. And so clearly, if it's not connected to the wastewater network, then there's obviously a separate process. So.
Thank you. Mayor Burney?
Just a question. I assume new businesses that come on stream will have to go through this registration process at the time that a consent is granted anyway, won't they? They won't be an afterthought.
Yes, they would need to. Yeah, new business will change of ownership. And yeah, I think the point was raised that even if they're not connected, we need to understand and we can file note that, and it may very well change. So it's just gathering data.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Appears to be none. I'm going to put it. Those in favour, please say aye. Against, say no. It is carried unanimously. And to D3, with the exception of, this is an amendment to E3.4, with the exception of tankered waste, no person may discharge any trade waste in a way that causes that trade waste to be discharged off the premises to land or water outside the premises unless the activity is consented by the regional council. Someone happy to move that?
I'm happy to move again.
Moved by Councillor Kamihana, seconded by Councillor Jennings. Thank you. Discussion? Appears to be none. I'm going to put that. Those in favour, please say aye. Against, say no. It is carried again unanimously. And E, that the committee... Oh, sorry. Yes.
Sorry, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to clarify at this point, the officer feedback around the time frame for the trade waste consent from the 2 to 5 years, that didn't require any further
amendment did it.
Justine, did you, or Dan? Okay. Just.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you, Councillor Jennings, being quite specific in what we were told today in the bylaw.
Yes, we would still need, and that was the earlier introduction statements around section 4.15 and 4.16, that we would need to change that before that final report goes through to council.
So I'll just move that we endorse that approach, or how do you want to capture that, Mr. Chair? We could note that that those changes will be made ahead of the.
Well, would that perhaps it could come as a recommendation? It should be a recommendation. So perhaps the wording, Dan.
Well, the wording was around 4.15, removing the first 4 letters. So subject to clause 4.16 would be removed, and 4.15 would become that period for which trade waste consent is granted will be 5 years from the date of grant, and then it would be a removal of section 4.16. So we could capture those in the minutes.
I think we'll just take our time. We'll get it up as a formal recommendation. We'll just take a moment to get it. Yeah. Thanks. Councillor Tamihana, we're just getting Alice to get the wording exactly right, and then we'll read it out again just so that we're all comfortable with the wording. That change from the 2 to the 5 year capacity for the duration of the consent.
Yeah.
So, are you happy to respond to that? So, I think what the officers had picked up through the submissions and some pre-hearing email correspondence was that the bylaw, previous drafting of the bylaw, provided for a default setting of 2 years, rather than giving them the flexibility, say, for a low-risk business, actually we could go straight to 5 years, but there's still a need to kind of create a minimum and a maximum, and so the shift in wording is just to provide that ability to respond to the risk-based assessment. Is that?
Yeah, that is it. And just for absolute clarity, I'll just get Alice to read it out, and that does address the deletion of that subsequent clause here. Alice?
So the recommendations would read that the committee recommends council amend E 4.15 to the period for which a trade waste consent is granted to be 2 to 5 years from the date of grant, and additionally that the committee recommends council remove E 4.16 from the proposed bylaw.
So happy to move that. Councillor Jennings moves, and a seconder for that. Seconded Mayor Burney. Discussion? There appears to be none. Thank you. We've worked through that. So I'll put it. Those in favour, please say aye. Against,
Aye.
Against, say no. It is carried. Any further proposed changes from the table that have not already been identified?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I do just want to touch up again on the recommendation around Te Manawa Te Wai. So is that something we're going to consider here today as being provided to us?
Yes. Now, I think Dan did answer that earlier, didn't he, saying that contact was going to be made, discussion with the iwi or something.
No, I think in the hearings committee, he's recommended that we could consider today that the overall purpose of the bylaw is to facilitate an integrated approach to local waters management in the Horowhenua that recognises the interdependencies between each component and promotes the sustainable use and management and recognition of Te Manawa Te Wai. The following purposes are relevant to the four water services, etc., etc. So I just wanted to ensure that we are considering that as a part of today's proceedings.
Yes, no, thank you for that, Councillor Tamihana. I was thinking of something quite separate. Yeah, that was the question I initially asked. Yes. So I think it would be appropriate to make that a recommendation. I for one, would support it. In fact, I'm happy to move the wording that's already there.
Happy to second if we can do that.
Yep. So just need again to be clear on the process. So the wording is. Shall I read it out? That the purpose of the local waters combined bylaw, be amended to include reference to Te Mana o Te Wai.
Yep.
Yeah. So the suggestion was, knowing that at a parliamentary level, with the local government water services bill currently going through select committee appeals, that in terms of timing, that won't be resolved up until at least the 17th of June after the bylaw is adopted. So what we have suggested to the hearings committee is they could pick up a new statement along the lines of the overall purpose of the bylaw is to facilitate an integrated approach to local waters management in the Horowhenua district that recognises the interdependencies between each component and promotes their sustainable use, management and recognition of Te Mana o Te Wai. The following purposes are relevant to the four water services: water supply, wastewater, trade waste and stormwater managed under this bylaw.
Quite lengthy, but Alice has a copy of that already. Justin, Councillor Tamihana, does that satisfy your concerns?
Yeah, it absolutely does. And I just wanted to acknowledge Daniel for providing that recommendation and that option for us today.
Thank you. So you're happy to move that, Councillor Tamihana? Is there a second for that? I will second it, so it's on the table. You're speaking to it, Councillor Jennings.
Yeah, I just want to be clear on the motion, because I would have framed it as that the committee recommends that we adopt the wording set out in paragraph 58 of the, because essentially what it's saying is that that the rather than have express reference, it's the fundamental underpinning concepts that have been incorporated into a proposed new purpose section. So I want to be really clear on what it is exactly that we are moving to include, because if it's the wording under paragraph 58, then yes, I'm on board. But if it's something else, then so to clarify to the mover and the seconder, is that what has been moved, that we adopt the wording that is captured under paragraph 58 in the box?
Councillor Tamihana?
Yeah. Yeah, that's exactly what my intent is, and I think, as Mr. Haig said, although there is a change happening at Central, we're still currently bound by what's in front of us today. So I thank you for pointing out point 58, because that's what it is. Kia ora.
Yep, all good. No, thank you for that. Sorry.
You beat me.
Page 14.
To confirm that, so the box is the purpose section as it stands, and the recommendation would just add those words in recognition of Te Mana o Te Wai into that.
So you are saying, in effect, that you're happy with the current recommendation on the table? Yeah.
To further clarify, it just adds the words at the end of that first sentence in A6(1).
That is correct. So paragraph 58, we've into that first paragraph added the statement and recognition of Te Mana o Te Wai, and I earlier read out the entire purpose statement. But yeah, it's just those additional.
Take our Councillor Jennings.
So I'm not fundamentally against this, but what my caution is that if officers are telling us that there is some discussion at the central government level about the effect and meaning of that, then what is the impact of including those words in this bylaw if there is a level of uncertainty at the moment? So I guess if, through you, Chair, the question would be, as I say, not opposed to this, but I want to understand what is the impact, what is the operational impact and do we have a level of certainty, sufficient certainty to include that wording, and what it means and what the impact is for the organisation by including it at this point.
So look, from my perspective, the words matter at present, and what happens in the future will happen in the future. So it's about putting value on those words as they stand at the moment, the mana of those words at the moment. But that's from my perspective. Dan, over to you.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. That at a principle level, there's a system which focuses on the awa, on the water first, and that's very much aligned with the outcomes we're trying to seek through the bylaw. It then looks for the provision for life, for providing for water, for consumption, and cascading down from there in terms of order of priority. I can't provide any further information on what perhaps the future looks like and the outcomes of the select committee review. But as it stands now, there's a good alignment behind the objectives and the purpose of the bylaw and the outcomes sought through Te Mana o Te Wai. That's a high level vision, but Councillor Tamaniana may want to speak further to that.
That response. Yep.
So Justin, I'll be with you in a moment. So with that explanation, Councillor Jennings?
That's fine. The scope of the motion is clear, and that's fine.
No, thank you for the questioning, the challenge. Councillor Tamihana?
No further comments. I again just thank everyone for taking it on board, and Daniel for articulating it as you have, and also you, Mr. Chair. It is what's required of us right now anyway, and in time I'm sure we'll be reviewing this policy again.
Thank you. Any further discussion? So I will put that recommendation to Council. Those in favour, please say aye. Against say no. It is carried. Any further recommendations from the panel? There appear to be none, so we move to E, which is that the committee recommends council adopt the proposed local waters combined bylaw 2025 as agreed by this committee. Happy to move. Councillor Jennings, Councillor Tamihana seconds. Discussion. Appears to be none. I'll put it. Those in favour, please say aye. Against, say
Aye.
no. That is carried. And look, could I, just before we close with our karakia, could I just acknowledge all parties, the hearings panel, thank you, great workers, and much appreciated, and officers for your input also. And could I special thanks to those who turn up and submit your gold. So thank you very much indeed. If we could finish with our karakia. Here we go. Please join me. Kia whakairea te takapu, kia wātia Aotearoa, kia tūruki whakataha ai, kia tūruki whakataha ai, hui tai kia.
Thank you very much.
Cheers.
Thank you.